Hello and welcome to Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. Today's episode comes to you from the Auckland Writers Festival, where I'm joined by two remarkable creatives who are shaping not just the stories we tell, but the platform where they're told. They're Māori, their father and daughter, and they're this year's guest co-curators of the festival itself, responsible for crafting a powerful Māori strand that sits at the heart of the programme. Their work spans poetry, film, fiction, television and more, and their conversation is just as compelling as their art. Welcome to Michael and Matariki Bennett. Such a pleasure to have you both here. Michael, I understand that storytelling runs deep in your family. So what kind of stories were around you when you were growing up? I mean, I know, for instance, your great-grandfather had a whole wonderful narrative.
My grandfather, actually, Matariki's great-grandfather. So my grandfather was Frederick Augustus Bennett, and he was the first Māori bishop of Aotearoa. And he was an extraordinary man. He was a bishop, and he was a man who led religion, but he was also very socially dynamic. He was, at a certain point in New Zealand history, Māori were in dire straits after colonisation, both in terms of us as a people losing our language, losing our culture. I mean, Matariki has been very, very drawn to these stories, and I'm sure she'll tell you a lot more about how language was nearly genocided. Frederick Augustus was part of a group called the Young Māori Party, who really in many ways saved Māori and brought us to where we are today, where the language is so regenerating. We as a culture are no longer facing losing our culture and who we are. It's an official language of New Zealand, etc., etc. His creativity, so as well as his, social consciousness and consciousness of his responsibility to his race, I found out this beautiful thing recently from a friend who actually did her musical thesis on his work, which I hadn't realised he was also an opera composer. And he toured the country with an opera that told the story of a really great love story of our tribe. So we're Te Aroa tribe, and there's a beautiful love story, Tūtanakai and Hinemoa, which is basically Romeo and Juliet, but on a lake, and two warring tribes that are kind of brought together by the illicit love of two of their children. And my grandfather composed this opera and toured it around the country. The really cool thing was, so I just love the idea that he was composing and writing, but the really cool thing was that at halftime, he'd got all the audience there, and then halftime he'd do a party political broadcast for the Young Māori Party once he had a captive audience. So yes, I love that story about his creativity and his politics.
How do you feel that your Māori heritage shaped what you wanted to say and how you wanted to say it?
I think everything, really, to be honest. And I think as a Māori creator, when we introduce ourselves as people, we talk about a whole lot of things. As you do a thing called a pepeha, which is basically your whakapapa, your genealogy. So the first thing you talk about is your mountain, then you talk about the canoe that brought us here from across the oceans, you talk about your ancestors, you talk about your grandparents, you talk about your mother and father. The last thing you talk about is yourself, because you are the least important person in the whole deal. Everyone else who has gone before you has shaped you. You're just a full stop at the end of the sentence, but you're not even a full stop because these next guys are coming on after you, so you're a comma at best. And I think that's just, if you look at the world like that, it's both humbling, but it's also very real. It's not about us, it's about those who went before and honouring them, and it's about those who are going after and hopefully leaving a slightly better world for them after you. And we as Māori creators, I think pretty much anyone you would talk to who is an artist in any form, poetry, painter, filmmaker, books, whatever it is, would have the same feeling that, you talk about what is important to you and what has been handed down to you, and you find a way to make that relevant and new for this world that we're in now, and that's always what you're looking at creatively.
Well, let's look at what comes after you, because sitting here with us is your daughter, who is Matariki. Matariki, I wonder if you could tell me about being raised in this incredibly creative family.
I feel so lucky to have been brought up to with my creative voice really nurtured by my parents. My siblings and I all have different art forms that we are particularly interested in. My sister is a painter and my brother is a film composer. He's a musician. And I'm a poet, well, writer. And all our life, art has been encouraged. But I do often hear mum and dad's friends going, do you wish that you had a lawyer or do you wish that you had a doctor? But no, naturally, we have all become artists and we all collaborate artistically because that's the way we were brought up.
Was there a moment when you thought, yes, this is my path?
Yesterday, following the moment I knew, there was the gala at the festival, my friend asked me, what was the moment you knew? And I instantly was like, when I was 14, I was in my social studies class with my really good friend Manaiatu Wharehuani, and we were talking and we were, acting up in class, maybe giggling a bit too much, and we were on Facebook and a video popped up on our Facebook feed of this poet, spoken word poet called Rudy Francisco, and we'd never seen anything like that. We'd never seen poetry in that form of like the performance poetry, and both of us were just absolutely hooked. And then at the end of the class we spoke to our teacher, Whai Alice, and we were like, look at what we've found, and she connected us with an organisation that then nurtured our voices and brought us into the world of spoken word poetry. So I'd say that was the moment, that I was like completely hooked on it, the performance and the writing.
And of course you've been nurtured by your father, by your mother, who's also an artist. And Michael, your work spans fiction, it spans memoir, film, television. How do you choose which medium to use for a particular story?
So I'm so not business oriented. If I had a sense of how to direct your career, I just wouldn't do it like that. I'd do one thing and get known for it. When I was a younger filmmaker, I went to Los Angeles and went around the agents and showed them my short films, and one was a comedy and one was a desperately sad story about saying goodbye, a family saying goodbye in a funeral. And they said, yeah, they're both amazing, but which one are you and how can we sell you if we don't know who you are? I'm just drawn to the stuff that gets its hooks into me, and I can't do anything but tell that story, and be that in documentary. I spent a long time working on a miscarriage of justice case about a young Māori man that took up like a decade of my career, and I couldn't be more thankful because it was something that I could use the skills that I'd developed to really fight for something that was wrong, to put it right. On the other hand, I've spent 20 years making narrative drama, and still do, but also just discovered this thing called prose, crime fiction writing, which, I kind of love everything that I do, and I feel blessed that I kind of like have fiddled around and found out that I can do more than one thing. But again, like your first question, which was so great, like pretty much everything I do, even though they're in different genres, it does kind of come back to conversations about who we are as Māori and as Indigenous people in the world. And
I want to come back to that work on justice, but first, Matariki, do you find that there are threads, emotional or cultural, that run through everything that you do?
100%, same as Dad. Naturally, I'm drawn to stories about whakapapa, and given the history of Aotearoa, they intertwined with a lot of trauma and intergenerational trauma, language trauma, culture trauma. So in exploring my heritage, I'm also exploring political issues and social issues, and that's what I love to write about. That's what I find myself most interested in, and yeah.
Do people get that? Are young people in New Zealand today, of any race, engaged with that? Because it seems to me, as a complete outsider coming here, that Maori culture really does have a central place within the national identity, which I gather wasn't always the case.
Yeah, totally. The kōhanga reo generation, I'm of the kōhanga reo generation, which is the kōhanga reo movement was a movement starting kōhanga reo kindergartens, where from babies you're taught your language, you're given your cultural identity, and that sets you up for life. You can walk through life knowing who you are, knowing your language, and being a product of the kōhanga reo generation. Friends that I have who didn't grow up through kōhanga reo, who aren't Māori, still there's an understanding, and it's so encouraged in schools, when I was in school anyway, to speak the language. It was all around us, it was natural, and it's a part of our culture. We're facing at the moment politically facing some really scary times, but I know it's so evident. I mean, at the Hikoi last year, the amount of people that were standing up for our culture and standing up for our people, we are united and we have so many people behind us.
I mean, was that the case when you were growing up?
No, it wasn't. It was very... Matariki writes about this a lot in her poetry, about how my generation doesn't have the language. My dad's generation didn't have the language. Some of them did, but not many. And it's been the kōhanga reo movement has really hit full force with Matariki's generation. There's been such a commitment to it, and so I don't have my language, and it's really moving to me that Matariki, in her poetry, speaks so honestly about how she sees that is a deficit for me, it's a hole in my heart that makes me feel not as comfortable to move through the world as she does. So yes, there's been significant change in the last generation, and it's kind of beautiful to see. It's beyond beautiful to see. Matariki and her generation have, in a way, they're able to move comfortably in the non-Māori world, and they're able to move comfortably in the Māori world. And no, you couldn't ask for more as a parent.
And I mean, there has also, of course, been a lot of racial discrimination here in the past, and that has led to terrible miscarriages of justice. And as you referred to earlier, you were very involved in one of those cases.
Yeah, in 2010 or 2011, I guess my life really changed when a private investigator called Tim McKinnell came to me and showed me some police interview tapes from probably 10 or 15 years earlier of a young Māori man in a police interview room in South Auckland. What we would find out later was that the young man, Taina Porter, had gone into the police about other matters, he was a car thief, but he'd gone into the police because he'd heard that there was a $20,000 reward for a woman who'd been brutally murdered and raped a year later, whose case hadn't been solved, and they were trying to find information. And Taina went in and volunteered that he was involved in the crime, totally fictitiously. He was a 17-year-old young Māori man with, as it transpired, a brain injury, and he was a really proud dad. He had a 2-year-old daughter, but who he'd had when he was 15 years old, because he didn't have an education. It was very hard for him to look after her, so he decided to make a false confession to try and get that money. Watching those tapes was one of the most devastating moments of my life, because what I saw in front of me was he clearly had no idea about the crime. First of all, they asked him to describe the victim that he said that he was involved in this murder, and he described her as blonde and chubby, fat looking. She was actually brunette and athletic. And at that point, the cops should have just opened the door and said, "Go home, this is crap." They didn't open the door and say, "Go home." And they had him there for 5 days without a lawyer, and over the course of those 5 days he saw pictures of her. He was able to fabricate a confession that in his mind would get him the money. It was the confession he was fabricating got him 21 years in prison. So when I watched those tapes, I then went and met Taina in prison, had this extraordinary experience of meeting this man who I thought he would be brutalised by the system. He was the opposite. He was warm and kind and generous. I went home and talked to Jane and Matariki and Mahina and Tihime, our children, and said, I don't know what I'm going into, but I will have to do whatever I can with my skills to help Tim, the private detective who was trying to free Taina, get this guy justice. I'm stepping into this story that's about murder and gangs, and it's all scary, but I can't not do it. And God bless them, Jane said, well, you got to do it. And yeah, that became, I guess, one of the most significant things that I'll ever do in my career. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And resulting ultimately in justice. I wonder if that influenced you when you wrote your crime novel, Better the Blood.
Absolutely. Having, I guess, gone through that experience and having really seen practically, while we can say to you that, the language is healing and recovering, and we as a people are no longer like on the verge of, we as a people in a much better place than we were, still, we are at the bottom of all statistics. We are at the bottom of health statistics, we're at the bottom of education statistics. The net worth of any Māori New Zealander is $20,000. The net worth of any non-Māori New Zealander is over $120,000. On the surface, things are better, but there's it's not healed, and injustice, that's the most obvious part of the iceberg. In injustice, we are in prison. 54% of prisoners are Māori. We're only 13% of society. So for Teina, that for me became like, okay, well, I know all the statistics, but this is a human being that I love, that my family loves. The kids used to come and visit him in prison, and he became part of our family. This is a human being that makes all the statistics real. And that really focused for me, I guess, as you say, what I went on to do in terms of the storytelling following that was very, very focused on injustice and social justice. And so my books, that's really the inherent flavour of them. Yeah.
And Matariki, your own creative voice is very distinct and powerful. Your poetry collection's steeped in just local, your own culture. Tell me about wanting to write about that and about how you begin when you're drawing on ancestral stories.
So when I began writing the book, I started with this poem called E Kono Hiakwe, which means girl, where are you from? And I think for a lot of teenagers or people in their early 20s, that's a big question mark over you. Where are you from? Who are you? When I was in my research phase of writing the book, I stumbled across the sound archives and I typed in Bennett into the sound archives and I found recordings of my grandfather, Dad's dad, speaking on the radio, which I played to Dad and he was like, no, that's not him. And then had a listen again and he was like, oh, he's put on an accent for the radio. I found recordings of my great-grandfather who Dad was talking about earlier. And when I found one particular recording of the bishop, he was speaking in Te Reo Māori, and it was the first time I had heard somebody in my direct family speaking our language, and it really, really, really struck me. And I listened to it, and I listened to what he was saying, and what he was saying nearly 80 years ago was still relevant now. He said, "I roto i nei rā ki taku nei mā takitaki ake, kua mōhio katoa tātou te reo Pākehā, kua tātou tamariki kua koreke e mōhio ki te reo Māori," which means these days I observe we all know the English language and our children are strangers to te reo Māori. And completely true of Grandpa and completely true of Dad. And here I was being able to understand, probably for the first time in 2 generations, directly beneath him, what he was saying. So yes, that's why I'm so compelled to write about these things, because I have something that Dad doesn't have and his dad didn't have, and I'm able to speak to those things and hopefully bring those to light for them.
And of course you have things that help and complement each other because you've actually worked together. Tell me about some of the projects that you and your daughter have been on.
We've done some extraordinary things together. I mean, most recently we're co-curators Māori of the Writers Festival, which is a beautiful project that we've done for 3 years now. And our attitude going into it was really like, a writers' festival, I guess people from the outside of the festival would kind of look in and go, it's probably just going to be people sitting around on stage of a certain age group, chatting about the great books. And for us, it was kind of the opposite. It's almost probably, in terms of like our guests, we've had, rappers, singers, poets, performers of traditional Māori instruments, actors, all kinds of people, and maybe 5% novelists or something like that. Because for us, we really took the attitude that this is about issues more than anything. We took the widest possible view of what a writer was. All of those people are writers, of course they are. Our rapper is of course a writer, and an actor is of course a writer. They're creating stuff that never existed before. And so we took a very wide view, and what I guess the common thread through all of our stuff is that we curate is, looking at social issues to do with Māori. So that's been fabulous. One of the most amazing moments of my whole life was that we made a short film together, which Matariki and Jane, Matariki's mum, my partner, we wrote together. Matariki and I directed it together. Matariki's sister Mahina did the costumes, and her brother Tihema did the music. That was beautiful on its own, that we made this short film together, but what was like even more mind-bending was it's a story, it's sort of a mythological story brought to today. We have a tradition of patuparehi in the forest, who are fairy people who mischievous and a bit naughty, and they kind of steal people's hearts. And the story was about a young woman who is just turning 18 who falls in love with a fairy person in the forest. And ultimately the story is about her leaving home to be with her people. And it was in an age where Matariki was on the verge of leaving home to be with her own tribe, her age. So it was a kind of metaphorically, it was a kind of a story of us as a family making it. So
tell me how that was for you, Matariki. I mean, working with your dad on an equal footing, must have been extraordinary.
It was so special. I remember so vividly when we were figuring out, plotting out the scenes and thinking of the shots within the scenes. And I had this vision in my head for one particular scene. I really wanted a shot where you could see two of the actors reflected in the mirror and then one of the actors in the doorway. And it was one of the real pivotal scenes in the film. And when we were doing a recce, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, I was talking to Dad about like what I kind of thought about. He was like, oh no, whatever, that's not going to work, blah, blah, blah. Get to shooting, and he goes, oh, I've got this idea for a great shot for this. And he took all the credit for my shot. But I didn't let him take the credit. I said, no, that was me. But no, really special, and so lucky to learn alongside my family. I mean, they're honest in ways that I think a lot of people wouldn't be, but careful. They know how to guide me, but to push me further than I think a lot of people would. Yeah, very lucky.
Yeah. So, Michael, do you think there's any sort of competitive energy between you and your daughter? Like stealing her mirror shot?
Gotcha. No, I so don't. And the reason I will tell you this is that, so Matariki's just published her first book at the age of 22. Oh my goodness. And that's a prime example. She beat me by 35 years and I couldn't be more happy. But the story behind that one too was that we were both up for the same grant to write a book. And Matariki got the grant and I didn't get the grant to write my book. And again, I have never been so happy not to get a grant. As a parent, there's nothing more that you could want than your children to bloom as big as they can bloom.
And Matariki, I wonder if that tension's helped define your voice in any way.
Writing has been, working creatively has been role modelled so well by my parents, and knowing that this actually could be a career and can be a fruitful thing and a lifelong thing. And so I think knowing, I don't know how to put it into words, but seeing it role modelled that way and knowing that it's a possibility is all the encouragement I need. It's I'm in such a privileged position to have such a supportive family, and to know that there is a future in work like this, and it's all overly encouraged with me and my siblings, which pushes me to keep going. And
And it's wonderful also, you're giving this creative energy not just to your own family, but in your position here as co-curators of the Māori strand of the festival, you are really bringing that to the public at large, Māori and non-Māori.
No, absolutely. It's been a huge part of our curation. Matariki is completely immersed in the poetry world. So every year we've been looking at what poets that she knows of, because she knows all these voices out there, what poets that we can encourage. The same with so many of our friends. Like there was an extraordinary session that we did last year where a friend of mine, Rob Mokaraka, who is a really great actor who I've directed, and he's a mate, but he's got this extraordinary story where he was at a very low point in his life and he tried to commit suicide by cop. He phoned the police and said, there's a guy on my street with a gun. And when the cops came, he walked out with a wooden spoon wrapped in a tea towel and got shot. He survived, and he's turned that into this extraordinary process that he goes around speaking to young Māori men, because we've got terrible statistics of young Māori men committing suicide. Talks about his story, shows them his abdominal wound where he was shot, talks about where he was in the depths of his depression, and talks about healing. So having him on stage, but the beautiful thing that came out of that, for instance, was that a publisher was in the audience who had never heard the story before, and he's now got a book deal to tell his story and to take it to even more people. So, I think it's just naturally who you are. You want to that competitive thing is, I don't think it drives many of us. It's everyone whose voice should be heard to get a leg up.
Yeah. Absolutely. What's firing you creatively at the moment, Matariki, and what do you hope that audiences at this festival take away with them?
At the moment, the political state of our country and the repeated attempts to take 10 steps backwards, particularly for Māori, but recently for women with pay equity. And that fires me up a lot, I think. So many rangatahi, so many young people. Hopelessness is, such a big thing for a lot of us. And what I really, really, really want to do in my mahi is to give some hope and to give some, I think, the kinds of people that we put on these stages, the kinds of voices that we uplift, at the core of it is about hope. It is about, these are people, doing the mahi, and we can all do it, and nurture the creativity through all of the darkness and through all of the hate that is around us at the moment. So yeah, I hope that audiences take away some of that hope, but also are reminded of the beauty of our culture and the beauty of our people, and that we're not going anywhere.
Michael, I guess the same question for you. I mean, you've done, I think, the world a great service bringing this to our attention. What do you hope we take away from it?
Yeah. This festival is kind of really interesting because there's a lot of sessions that reflect the world that we're in right now. There's a session about when tyrants fall, which I can't wait to go to, because what I hope it does is give us some hope that yes, tyranny is on the way back, but the tyrants will eventually fall. We're in a real interesting nexus in the world where a megaphone has been given to people who would not be able to say things previously, but suddenly it's okay to say the things that shouldn't be said. And I think it's just incredibly important for each of us to kind of recognise that this is a moment in time, and that equal voices need to be raised against it. What Matariki talked about the hikoi last year was absolutely amazing. So it was a hikoi, basically it's a march from one end of the country to the other against the step backs that have happened, because we do have a government that's right-wing, but in the New Zealand context of right-wing is not the same as the rest of the world. It's a little bit more centre than that, but it's still right-wing, and is walking back a whole lot of things about language, and it's things about, we previously had a Māori health authority because Māori health problems are very different to non-Māori problems. That's been walked back. So people are not sitting down and letting it happen. People Matariki's age especially are not sitting down and letting it happen. And I think it's just about each of us going, yes, fights that are worth fighting, we have to fight. Yeah.
Michael and Matariki Bennett, thank you both very much indeed. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the producer Steph Chungu and also to the Auckland Writers Festival. You can download this show and other episodes on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.